Hey guys, welcome back to Post Series. Today we're going to be taking a look at the time nodes. We're continuing on in our chapter 2 lesson of going through the Nuke node categories. So we already went over the image nodes, we also went over the draw nodes, and today we're going to be talking about the time nodes. And we see we have quite a bit of options when it comes to different nodes to affect the time of your footage. So let's get to it. I went ahead and created some backdrops so we could just quickly go through most of the nodes. And if you guys want any more details on any specific node, just leave a comment in the a comment below the video, and I will try to take a deeper look at that particular node. For now, let's just quickly go through the time nodes. I brought all of them in here. So first we'll go over the time clip, the time warp, and the time echo node. So I have some footage here, and then first we'll go through the time clip node. So the time clip will offset the input of the clip in time, or it can reverse the playback direction. So let's look at what that means. If we look at the node settings, right now I have my time clipped. Actually, let's create a new one. So let's just create a new one because actually I think I adjusted this one as I was setting it up. So let's go to create a new time clip. So we have a time clip node, and right now everything is the same. Now what we can do with the time clip is we want to make sure the frame range matches for our input. So we have 50 frames, so that's good. Now if we want to reverse the footage, we can click on the reverse, and then we'll see that our frame 50, which I created a frame hold here so you guys can see frame 50, is now frame 1. So the time clip can reverse the footage. The time clip can also fade in the footage. So let's see, we want to fade in our footage over 5 frames. Let's take a look at what that means. And we have it set to soft. So let's play this. I'll play it slower. So, and then we'll just play the first 10 frames. We don't need to watch the whole thing. And let's watch this fade in. So we have a nice fade in. And you can adjust the type of fade in that you want. Let's look at the linear option. So of course the soft is a bit more smooth. You can also add a fade out if you want it. So if you want the last 5 frames to also fade out, you can adjust that input for that frame number. And let's watch that one fade out. So we have just a few things that we can do with this node. So we have the fade out, we can reverse the footage, and let's see what else we might want to do. Let's go over the frame range. So for the frame range, you can adjust the settings here for whether you want the frames to hold, loop, bounce, or black. But we won't get into that for now. I think we went over that in one of our previous lessons, these options that come with some of the nodes. These are usually the same. So let's take a look at the time warp node. I'll plug my footage into the time warp. And the time warp node is going to retime the clip without altering the overall length. So you can just add a quick retime. Let's go to frame 1. So I already set this to 5. By default, it is set to frame 1. So if I want my clip, if I want to retime my clip by 5 frames, so I'll just set that to 5. My clip will still be the same length, but there will be a retime applied. So let's play this through. So now we're at frame 14. So if I look at my footage, this was my original frame 14, and this is my time warp frame 14. And let's actually go back to the beginning, and I'll do another frame hold at frame 5 since we're retiming it by 5, so we can take a look at our our frame 5 and then our time warp frame 5. So we see those two frames are the same. And this is pretty cool because it will keep the length of your shot exactly the same so that you don't have to worry about that changing. So that's pretty cool. These nodes are pretty heavy, so we won't be playing back a lot. If you don't know, you can always go to your cache menu and clear your cache to kind of speed things up if you had a lot of things playing back. And now let's look at the time echo node. So the time echo node merges multiple frames from the input to create a single frame. So this is actually a pretty cool node too. It will merge together multiple frames for you to create a completely new frame. So let's look at the before and then let's look at the after. Now, there are some settings here, so let's take a look. By default, it is set to max. So we see with max, we can definitely tell which 5 frames. I hope you can kind of see 5 fingers layered on top of each other. So you would need to adjust, depending on what part of your plate you want to use, you would need to adjust the echo method. So let's go to plus, and that's pretty bright. And then let's go to average. And now even with average, it's a little bit smoother here. So it's not as bad. So let's take a look. So this is like a newly blended frame that we created. It combined 4 frames. Let's go to 3 frames and see what we get. We might get a better result. So sometimes if you need to do some paint work, or you need to, or if you're doing a retime or something and something just isn't blending, or you need to paint something out when the person's moving, you need to do some cleaning up some artifacts, you might be able to use the time echo node to create a frame, and then you can use that frame. Say if you were painting, you can use that frame as your background 1 frame, and then you can, change your roto paint. You can use the reveal option, and then you can grab information from this frame that you created. So that's actually, that's like a pretty cool use for that time echo node. So let's keep going because we have a lot. So next we have the time blur node. So the time blur node will simulate an edge smear for a fast moving object. So I actually changed the footage because we have these birds flying. And of course these birds probably have some motion blur to them because they are flying. But say they were moving real slow, or I don't know. Let's just say there was no motion blur. Let me find a frame let me find a frame of a bird that's not blurred. This one's not really blurred. So let's go to that frame. Okay, and let's take a look at this time blur node. So the time blur, as I said, it will simulate some sort of motion blur for you. So right now we have by default the shutter is set to 5, and the shutter offset is set to custom. Let's change this to centered, and these are some of the same. These are some of the options you'll have when you're using you're creating motion blur and you're deciding how you want your motion blur to be generated. So we have centered, and now we can already see that bird looks like it actually has some motion blur. So that's pretty good. Let's go to start. Let's go to end, and then we'll go to custom. So centered is looking pretty good if we just needed some motion blur off the bat. So let's turn that off so we can see. Now it might be too much, and then you can go in and start adjusting the settings and filtering it out. But let's change this to start. Now that we have all the birds, let's turn it off so we don't see anything. We have end. Now, and you'll also see this more when you're playing it back. So let me see actually let's check the quality of this footage. 4K. I'll just go ahead and turn on my reduce my resolution for that so that maybe the playback will happen faster so we can see some of these nodes in action. Let's see. Let's get a look at this. Oh, this is actually, oh, because the offset. Okay. So the start, we don't want to stay at start. Let's go to, let's play this and see how it's looking. Yeah, this isn't looking that great. But there are probably times where this time blur node might be helpful for you. So that's the time blur node. And let's go to temporal median. So the temporal median will just apply a median filter to your footage. So let's check that out. So we have some footage and let's view it through the temporal median. So we see we just have a small smoothing effect. It's not that great. There's some edges. Let's see if we want to, let's look at the settings for that. So yeah, some areas are smooth and some are, we're getting these hard lines. Of course, my footage isn't degrained, so that also is playing a part in it. And then let's go to the add and remove. So this add 3-2 pull down will convert 24 frame footage to 29.97. So actually what you'll notice when you're adding that, so there's an add option and there's also a remove option. When you're adding that, you will see that your footage frames are different, and that's because the frame playback is changing. And if you needed to remove that, you could just remove it. So you might need it, you might want to do some work specifically where you added that in, and then maybe you start doing some work, and then at the end of, once you finish all your work, you want to remove it. I've never used these nodes, but if we compare the plate to the remove node, we see that now it's the same. Now we have the append clip node. So the append clip node will splice or join clips so that if I wanted to watch this footage and I wanted this footage to play right after, I could use this append clip node. And what I'll have to do though is I'll have to make sure my frame range is as long as both of these clips combined. So for now, I'll just change my project settings to 500. And then we can just see where one clip ends and the next one begins. So they switch right away using this append clip option. And I'll change that back to 50 because 500 is too long. We're already having playback problems with these heavy nodes. So next we'll go to the vector nodes. So the first one is the smart vectors, which we, I just did a demo for the smart vectors. This is just, the smart vectors will calculate smart vectors that you can use with the smart vector toolset. So we know that if we go to smart vector, we will now see our smart vectors here in this. Now, what the vector to motion node will do, it will convert the smart vectors to motion. So right now we're viewing the smart vectors, but if we wanted to, actually we don't have a motion channel yet because we didn't add it, but well, not immediately. Here it is through the other layers option. So yeah, so we don't have the motion layer because the smart vectors is only displayed in the smart vectors channel. Now, if we added the vector to motion after our smart vectors, we will now see that when we view the motion channel, we have the smart vectors in the motion channel. This is basically doing the same thing as the vector generator node. So if we compare the two, we actually see that the smart vectors is providing a nice, clean, and smoother result than the vector generator. So the vector generator will just create motion vectors in the motion channel for us too. So, and this node has a few more options where by default, let's see if we want to see the default. The default is 0.3. So let's check this out. Now it's actually looking similar to the smart vectors. But if you up the vector detail to 1, and actually I think the smart vector detail was also 0.3, so that's probably why. So let's compare these two. So they're pretty much the same. We have the same information. But for the vector generator, you can change it to localize, which you see it's not as smooth. And this will affect your render with all this blocky, blockiness and everything. So basically, using the vector to motion with the smart vector will give you the same result. It's better if you set your vector generator to regularize though, and you'll get the same exact result that you would if you used it. And lastly, we have a bunch of retime nodes. Now, retime nodes are these specific retime nodes are a whole demo on their own. But for now, we'll just go through some of the quicker ones. So let's see. We have the frame hold, which I used earlier. So the frame hold will just, it will select the single frame of your playback and hold it. So if I wanted to, no matter what, let's see, I'll change this to 20. Can I press E? Let's change. Okay, well, actually I changed it to 5, but let's change it to 20. So basically, if I frame hold my frame at frame 20, go back to my RGBA channels, and I play my footage back, it will be static because I have a frame hold at 20. So if I view my footage, then I view that. So this is good for paint work when you're painting on a single frame or you're creating a clean patch. Very often you'll use the frame hold for that. So that's the frame hold. The frame blend node will interpolate between frames rather than copying them for a smoother motion. So let's take a look at the frame blend node. And right now we have it set to 5. So this is probably similar to the time echo node that we use to merge multiple frames, but let's take a look at what the frame blend is doing. So we have it set to 5. Let me see if we see that we have this frame blending. This is looking pretty good if you need to like add some motion blur or reintroduce some motion blur for some edges that you had to like if you had to recreate some edges, this might be useful. It's not as smooth, but that's the frame blend. Next, we have the frame range tool, which will just set the frame range for the input clip that you're using. We have the retimes, so you can just set that to whatever frame range you want. Then we have the retime node, which retimes the clip to slow down or speed up the playback. So I have my retime connected. Now we see we also have an option here to reverse the footage as we did in our previous, our other node, our other time node. And then let's just turn that off first. And we can also adjust the speed of our clip, so we can change the speed if we want it to play slower or faster. And then we can adjust the shutter, which we'll see will affect the motion blur. And then we have these same options to loop, continue, bounce, or keep it black as. And let's go to the time offset. So the time offset node, it offsets the input clip backwards or forwards in time. So we also have the same option to reverse the clip here. And then if we wanted to move up 5 frames, we could offset our time to be -5. And if we do a frame hold for frame 10, we can now see that they are the same. So with the time offset, you can either offset your clip by, you can offset it forwards or backwards using the time offset node. We also have the oflow and the kronos node. These are 2 nodes that are used specifically for retime. They do a better job at frame blending when we're merging frames or, slowing down the clip. If you're slowing down the clip, the node will have to create frames, create new frames, and also if you're speeding it up. So when that's happening, these two nodes have additional settings that you can adjust to have the transition much smoother. So we will actually have a separate